The Clear Light of Day, Part 12. Your cable's snapped. Esme had a staff meeting in the morning and returned to find that Jabez had called and taken her bike. She had several visits in nursing homes to make in the afternoon, but drove out afterward to Wiles Green and found Jabez in his workshop, squatting down to examine her bike, his cat stretched contentedly in the ashes by the comfortable glow that smoked under the flue. I wonder if it would take one a bit thicker. Anyway, I've been thinking from what you said I might have tightened the pivot bolts too much when I put the brake arms back. It's been so wet and muddy for the time of year. More wear and tear, I expect. I better look at them. Don't want you having an accident. Better put another stick or two of wood on the fire and sit you down by there. It won't take me long. He lifted her bike onto a stand and knelt down beside it, looking critically at the brake system. Can you pass me the Allen key? He looked up at her swiftly, smiled at her blank incomprehension, and got to his feet to fetch it himself. Esme pushed together the glowing remains of firewood in the bed of soft grey ash and added some small twigs to rekindle a flame. You were very nice about Miss Trigg last night, she said. The dry sticks caught fire and she placed some larger pieces in a pyramid on top. I believe in being nice about people, he replied, and she watched his fingers deftly removing the anchor nuts and the wire from the straddle yoke, setting the bits carefully beside him, dismantling its mysteries with incompetence. Besides, he added, flashing her a glance of mischief she thought almost reminiscent of Ember, Miss Trigg's done a lot for me, more'n she knows. Has she? Esme looked at him in surprise, pleased and relieved to hear something good about Miss Trigg. He had the bits on the floor and looked at them all, wiping them with an oily rag, turning them over to look for faults. He reached across to a tin on the ground near him and selected a piece of emery paper, sanded a metal stud, examined it again, sanded it some more, then reached the paper back into the tin and wiped down the part he had smoothed. Go on, said Esme. Miss Trigg? Jabez hesitated. Well, she said, curious. He took a breath, uncertain, and then proceeded. I got married in the 1960s. I was 26 and Maeve was 19. We hadn't been anywhere much. We weren't sophisticated people. Brought up church and chapel we were, a bit innocent. I don't suppose you remember the 1960s? Well, not much, not really. I mean, I was born in 1959, so I was little while it was all happening. But what's that got to do with Miss Trigg? Jabez was satisfied with the state of the bits he had before him, and fetching a length of cable, he began to reassemble the cable housing, threading the wire through the hole in the yoke anchor bolt. At that time, Miss Trigg ran a young people's fellowship at the chapel. I never went, and Maeve was church, not chapel. But Maeve's friend Susan always used to go. He pulled the tin toward him with his free hand and rooted in it for a spanner. Although you were only a babe in the 60s, I'm sure you know it was a time of revelation to us young folk then. There were books and magazines and things, pamphlets even. Things you always wanted to know and never dared ask. Are you with me? Yes, said Esme. She sensed a certain reticence in him and felt so curious as to what he was going to tell her that she hardly dared breathe in case he thought better of it and withdrew. Yes, well, Susan, I don't know who she got it from. A girl up from work, I should think. She worked in a dress shop in South Harbour. She had this booklet that had come free with a magazine that told you all kinds of things. He rummaged for his cutters and trimmed the wire, then got up to find a cable end cap from a tobacco tin on his workbench. About making love, he explained unnecessarily. He fitted the cap onto the cable wire and crimped it on tight with a pair of pliers. There was everything you could imagine in this little book, he said, and a few things you'd never imagine and wouldn't like to try. He tossed the pliers back into the tin. Esme waited, fascinated. Susan gave the booklet to me and Maeve for a laugh, you know, 'cause we were getting married. He stood up and tested the brakes, shaking his head at them. Still isn't quite right. He squatted down by the bike. It had pictures, he added. I think I need a smaller Allen key. He found it and adjusted the little centre screw, tested the brakes again. That's better. And turned his attention to looking over the rest of the bike. But Susan, she was a bit of a stirrer, and she enjoyed baiting poor Miss Trigg, who must have been about your age at the time, though she looked ancient to us. That spoke's not right. Darn. Where's the spoke key now? He searched on his workbench. Here it is, he said, and returned to the bike, removing the tyre and the tube from the wheel. So she asked her about this booklet. I don't expect she told her all that was in it, I hope not anyway, but a lot of it. And she asked her what a young Christian person should think of it. Having laid aside the tube, he removed the rim tape he had put in, unscrewed the nipple, and drew the spoke out from the hub flange. Miss Trigg, as you might guess, told her it was all the devil's work, wickedness and sin, and a certain road to damnation. Like so many other things, Miss Trigg never had the chance at. Dancing, and the London theatres, and an evening at the pub. He drew the bent spoke through his fingers, examining it. How'd you do that then? You been riding off-road? He took the spoke to the back of the shed and measured it against some that he kept there until he was satisfied he had an exact match. He brought them both back and laid the old one on the ground. Bent bicycle spokes and tinfoil make good bird scarers for the peas, he remarked, and spun the wheel to the place that he wanted. I suppose Maeve and me had a bit of rebellion in us, else we wouldn't have left off going to Sunday worship. Anyway, when Susan told us what Miss Trigg had said, he pushed the spoke head through the eye in the flange and with gentle pressure weaved it, flexed it to weave it into relation to its fellows. We thought we'd have a try at the things in this book. He threaded the spoke through the eye at the rim and pushed the nipple onto the end. "Will you pass me that can? Not the 3-in-1, the synthetic one. Yes, thanks. And the little screwdriver, that one, with the red handle. Thanks." He tightened the nipple, looked critically at the tension, tightened it a little more, and then looked round for his file and worked at the small protrusion of the spoke end on the wheel rim. "Me and Maeve," he said softly, "we had no idea how much pleasure was in our bodies, the things you could do with hand and tongue. Maybe I shouldn't be discussing this with you, but you've been a married woman. I think you know." He began to turn the wheel, plucking each of the spokes gently at their midpoint, his head cocked like a bird, listening to the pitch of their tension. Not all that was in that little book appealed to us. We just liked what was gentle. He stopped at the spoke opposite the one he had just fitted, tightening it half a turn, listening again to the tension. "So I think maybe I owe Miss Trigg something for 40 years of the sweetest pleasure in my marriage bed. It heightened my respect for God, which I have to say is more than anything else much did in my dealings with her." He turned the wheel slowly, feeling with his thumb for any protrusions. "Did you ever make love outside, in the fields, under the sky?" asked Esme wistfully. He smiled. "We did not. There is a lot of flint in the ground in this part of the world, and plenty of thistles." He lifted the bike from its stand and upturned it on the floor to rest on the handlebars and saddle, setting the handlebars straight. "Making love," he said, squatting down behind the front wheel, checking the alignment with the back one, "should, in my opinion, be done in a bed. 'Tis a thing of tenderness, and it should be warm and comfortable." He stood up and bent over the tin to look for chalk. "And private." Spinning the wheel, he brought the chalk slowly against it to mark the high points on the rim. "You make your bed in a field, and 10 to 1 the likes of Seer Ember will have chosen that hillside for an evening ramble, and have things to say that leave you hardly knowing where to put yourself." He made some more adjustments to the spokes, loosening, tightening, going over the whole wheel. "That should do it," he remarked, and replaced the tape, the tube and the tyre, and set the bike upright. Taking the air pump from the frame, he said, "However did we get on to this subject, anyhow?" He inflated the tyre until he was happy with it and continued, "You've got to keep these tyres properly inflated, Esme, or you're more likely to get a puncture. You should go for the pressure level they give you on the tyre wall, but don't be too gingerly with it. You could take it to twice that before you blew it off the rim. Yeah, I think that'll do now. The rest looks fine." She got to her feet and went to admire his handiwork. He glanced at her shyly. "I hope I haven't been too free in my conversation. I somehow feel I know you perhaps better than I do." As he stood before her, his roughened, oil-blackened hands resting light on the handlebars of her bicycle, his head a little bent, and his eyelids veiling his eyes in awkward modesty, she hardly liked to say that her overwhelming impulse was to put her arms round him and hug him. "You do know me better than you do," she said, "and you are a darling for fixing my bike." "It's my ambition," Esme thought, as his head dropped still further to hide his face, shy but pleased at what she'd said, "to have this man able to look at me for more than 2 seconds at a time." "Shall I put it outside while you tidy the things away?" she asked, just allowing her fingers to touch his as she put her hands on the saddle and the handlebars. He released them from his hands instantly and took a step back, his heel crashing against the tin on the concrete floor, startling himself. "Thank you," he said, "but just set it against the wall. I think it's coming on to rain again and... Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe you must be going. I was just assuming you'd like a cup of tea." "I know I would." Knowing she would be at his cottage later in the day, Esme had avoided tea all day, drinking coffee at her staff meeting and declining the offers of drinks from kindly staff in the nursing homes. In his kitchen, she sat on one of the stools by the table, watching Jabez set the kettle to boil and then scrub the oil from his hands at the sink. "Jabez," she said, with sudden misgivings about the simple question she had to ask, "how much do I owe you for this work?" Jabez looked at her briefly as he crossed the small space to the Rayburn and took a dish towel from its rail to dry his hands. "You owe me nothing, my pleasure," he said as he leaned past her to reach the tea caddy down from the shelf. "No, really, Jabez, this is your living," she insisted. "If you supply free parts, free labour and free delivery to all your friends, you'll be bankrupt." He spooned tea leaves into the pot in silence, fetched milk from the fridge, turned to shoo away a hen appearing in cautious inquiry at the doorway, took the kettle as it began to sing from the hot plate, and poured the boiling water into the pot. "Jabez," she said, "you owe me nothing," he said quietly. He poured milk into their mugs and replaced the bottle in the fridge. He sat on the kitchen chair alongside the table, pulling the other stool to him and putting his feet up on its crossbar. Into the silence, as he waited for the tea to draw, he said gently, "Let me have something to give you." Esme laughed. "Something to give? Jabez? You feed me, you give me tea by the gallon, you share your fireside and your friendship. How about me having something to give? Let me pay you for this. It's costing you money." Jabez poured the tea out into the mugs and pushed hers toward her without looking at her. I think you don't know," he began, glancing at her fleetingly, but thought better of it and shook his head. "You owe me nothing," he repeated again. "Here's to drier weather in the autumn," and he raised his mug to her in a toast. "Oh, Jabez," she murmured in reproach. "I got ideas of my own about money," he said, setting his mug down. It served all right for a refuge, but the tea was too hot to drink. "I believe that affluence and ambition are diseases. Like St. Paul saying, the love of money is the root of all evil, and saying, for himself, he learned to be content with what he had in every circumstance of life. And Jesus saying the cares and pleasures of the world are like brambles that choke the light and life out of the tender shoot of integrity and compassion in a person. Human greed is at the bottom of half the troubles of the world. If you aspire towards a spiritual life, whatever religious system you practice in, be you Hindu or Buddhist, Christian or humanist, Taoist or Muslim or Jew, whatever, the gateway to spiritual path is simplicity. And unless you undertake a discipline of simplicity, your spirituality will be like joists with dry rot. He looked at her momentarily, his glance shy but eager. That this mattered to him was very clear. When Francis of Assisi taught his friends and followers about the way of Christ, he was adamant about simplicity. And for that matter, so was Gandhi, so was Jesus, so was Lao Tzu. Francis talked about being in love with Lady Poverty, his bride, he said. He saw a vision of beauty in extreme simplicity. The beggar's bowl, the borrowed donkey shed, walking barefoot. Humility, you know, and offering his time to serve other people as a gift of himself in love. He's a bit of a hero of mine. I'm not man enough to scale the heights he did, but I can make little forays into the foothills. I can manage tiny bits of hospitality and the occasional act of kindness, not often. And I know that spirit, life, is a wild flower that doesn't take to cultivation. You try to pick it, to make it an image thing, a stylish ornament in a vase, the finishing touch to an affluent setting, and it'll droop and die. To find it, you've got to walk the sheep tracks, not ride the motorway. Frugality, humility, quietness, working with your hands and finishing a job carefully and well, doing what you do mindfully and with peace, paying attention, simplicity, kindness, looking after things. That's my faith. And I can't call it a religion, it isn't systematic, but it holds together. It makes sense. Dogma and doctrine, they're too grand and overstuffed for the house where my soul dwells. I'm not poor though, Esme. I don't need very much. Esme drank her tea, watching him. He spoke quietly and unpretentiously, almost with reluctance. What he had said came from very deep within him, she thought. So what may I give you in return for everything? She asked him. Jabez cupped his hands around the mug of tea. If I can choose, then I would treasure your friendship. Oh, Jabez, that's already given. Okay, so we're quits, and you owe me nothing, he said. Next instalment tomorrow. How are things with you? What's changing? I've got the feeling that this period of time with the coronavirus and the lockdown and the social isolation and so on, it was a huge upheaval, and it had a profound impact on people. And then they kind of went down into it and got used to what they were doing and got the hang of it and understood the details of it. And people have been online looking at the news and following the political situation and following the news all about the virus and what to do and how to live now. And meanwhile, something else has changed, and we've kind of gone into something new. We've I don't know, we've gone in a level somehow. And I'm finding that there's a change in emphasis in the way people are feeling. I'm sorry, I don't think I've explained that very well. But if you know what I mean, I wonder if that's also been so for you. It has for me. It's nice to see you today. Heavenly Father, I pray that you will bless this one who has come to share the story. Come, Christ, our Lord, our Saviour, our brother, our friend, and place your hands here where my prayers beckon. Bless this dear one. Bring your peace. Bring your courage. Bring your faith. Bring your perseverance and determination. Walk with us. Be with us. Show us the way. Amen. And I hope your day goes well. I bless you with the love of the Lord. May peace be with you.